Hey guys, what's up? My name's Frank Garcia, and today we'll be talking about something near and dear to my heart, and that's Borderlands 3. Because one of my favorite franchises of all time is actually the Borderlands series. And with Borderlands 3 coming out now in under 2 weeks, I wanted to make a video specifically about the characters and their classes. That way you guys can know when the game comes out what character and class you want to play and how you want to play Borderlands, because this year it's looking like it's going to be awesome. And while most people think of Borderlands being all about the guns, in a recent poll by Randy Pitchford, he actually found out that most people are looking forward to Borderlands for the characters and the story. So let's talk about it. But one thing, before we get started, let's go over how the class system this year is going to work. That way you guys have a little background before we jump into the actual characters and all their abilities. So this year, skill trees in Borderlands are actually pretty interesting. For each skill tree on every character, the topmost ability is actually your action skill, which is the main ability you're going to be using for the class that you spec into on each character. This can also have a few augmentations, like for example on Flak here, he has a pet as well, but for most characters it's just going to be one thing. Then as you move down the stack, as you can see going down here, you have mostly passive and some active abilities that really just augment some of your skills, like doing things like adding weapon damage or more shield protection, things like that, just passive. But now, new to the Borderlands series, on the sides you can see some kind of action ability augments, which can kind of enhance your action abilities in new and cool, interesting ways that can really change how the character is played and just how, each character really works overall. On top of that, the bottom ability in each class is actually the ultimate of every class, which is just a very powerful kind of enhancement for your character, just like the old Borderlands games that can also, once again, change how you play the game dramatically. But yeah, guys, without further ado, let's talk about some characters. So in terms of the order I'm going to be going in as well, Randy Pitchford also put up a poll of everyone's favorite characters and who they want to play. So I'm just going to be going from most popular to least popular today. Let's get started. So first up, we have by far the most popular hero this year for Borderlands, and that's Flak. Flak is a cyborg character who focuses at staying at range and doing damage from afar. And as a first for the Borderlands series, he actually is going to allow users to have pets, which will go and attack enemies while you sit in the back and do a lot of damage. Flak is an obvious choice for solo players, and the first loadout I want to look at is Stalker. For Flak, the Stalker class is all about getting critical hits while staying on the move and staying back. His main ability in the Stalker class actually allows him to go invisible, and then his next 3 shots will be critical hits, which is really good if you want to rake up the damage fast on a big boss or hard to beat enemy. On top of this, he also will have a pet called the Jabber Sidekick, which will increase his movement speed to allow him to move around the battlefield quickly, as well as just shooting and helping him find loot. When prompted, the Jabber will also throw radiation barrels at enemies, so this is going to be a really good sidekick against cybernetic enemies that I'm sure you're going to go up against throughout the entire game. Most of the skills in the Stalker tree rely around increased movement speed and taunting from your pet that allows you to run around the battlefield and snipe from afar while your pet kind of tries to tank everything up front and close. On top of this, critical hits and doing a lot of damage quickly is another big staple of the Flak Stalker class. So if you want to hang back in the sidelines and shoot from afar and do crazy DPS, this is probably the class for you. Next up for Flak, we have the Hunter class. And this is by far and away the class you want to play if you are purely and utterly focused on doing as much damage as you can while playing with Flak. The action skill in this tree allows Flak to throw out multiple flying pets that will dive bomb enemies and do major damage. On top of this, his actual pet that follows him around is a spider ant, which will allow Flak to regen health as he is walking around, and the spider ant is very tanky and will get right in the thick of things. That way you can stick back and keep shooting and shooting at enemies. The class is primarily focused on just heavy critical damage. Almost all of the skills in the tree either increase reload times, allow you to shoot more bullets more quickly, have random bullets fire at times, and most importantly, just do major critical damage as much as possible. This Flak class is suited well for solo and multiplayer players, as it allows the Flak player to stay back and get tons and tons of damage in on bosses and enemies. That way you can be a huge asset to the team. So if you like topping the DPS charts in all the games you play, Flak Hunter is probably the way to go. Next up, last but not least, is Flak in the Master class. So the Master class for Flak relies once again around damage, but less around critical damage and more around just raw, pure increased damage. His main attack skill, Gamma Burst, allows Flak to create a portal that his pet will follow through and then do radiation damage when he pops out to all the enemies around him. On top of this, he can use this skill to revive his pet if they are downed, and they will come up with about 30% health. His pet in this class as well is a guard skag, which will increase Flak's damage, as I was talking before, base damage. And when prompted, the skag will go vomit acid onto enemies. So this is just a pretty standard pet that, can do a little bit and increase damage. But most importantly, it's also the cutest pet of the bunch. So that's why Flak Masterclass is probably going to be a really popular one. The Master class is also the only one that relies heavily on increasing not only the damage for you, but the damage of your pet as well. This is the class you want to spec into if you want to have the strongest pet possible that's doing a lot of the damage in your entire lineup, not just you in the backlines. Next up, we have Moze, who is the big gunner class this time around for Borderlands 3. And what Moze can do that is so special is actually summon a giant mech unit that she can jump into. And then within this mech unit, on both her right and left side arms, she can equip one of her 3 possible action skills to kind of wreak havoc on the battlefield and do as much damage as possible. If you want to just have unfiltered fun and just go crazy with big gadgets and crazy guns, Moze is going to be who you want to play this time around. Moze's first skill tree, Shield of Retribution, as the name implies, is all about building shield and defensive abilities by attacking different enemies, and this class is also very good for multiplayer as a lot of these bonuses carry over to your team as well, not just Moze. In this lineup, her action skill is actually just a giant railgun that shoots electrified bullets that deal shock damage to enemies. So you can, if you want to, equip both of these railguns on the right and left hand side of your mech, or you can mix and match with the future specs we look into. But if you want to be a really tanky, defensive, shield-driven hero that can get in the mix of things and not have to worry too much, Moze Shield of Retribution is where you want to go. Next up, we have the Bottomless Mag skill tree for Moze. And this skill tree is really all about just kind of having a versatile lineup for your mech. It allows you to not only create a back turret on your mech that other players can jump into and shoot from, but it also just increases things like magazine size, reload times, and adds fun and new wacky abilities to your mech like a giant flamethrower. This class is all about just being versatile when playing Moze and allowing multiple different people in multiplayer games to jump onto your mech and do special things to attack enemies. On top of this, Moze's action skill in this branch is actually just a minigun that has unlimited ammo but will overheat if you fire too long. So like I said, this is the class you want to pick if you just want an overall, kind of decent damage, decent health, and a good teammate. This is where you want to go for Moze. Finally, the last skill tree for Moze is Demolition Woman. And this one is probably going to be a crowd favorite because this skill tree relies all around doing massive AoE splash damage. For instance, in this skill tree, Moze actually gets a grenade launcher on whatever arm she chooses, and on top of this, she can get up to over 8 grenade slots just in general while she's playing without the mech as well. Most of the skills in this tree rely around increasing splash damage, increasing the amount of grenades you can hold, or just adding new and crazy AoE abilities that can really rack up the damage when there's a lot of smaller enemies all clumped up together. This is also probably the Moze class that is least reliant on having other teammates on your team to use the abilities to their fullest. So if you're trying to go through a solo run with Moze, this is probably the class you want to go, as otherwise she's one of the characters in Borderlands 3 that is most tailored to multiplayer play in all of her skill trees. Next up, we have Zane, who is the kind of rogue assassin type character this time around for Borderlands 3. And what makes him so special is he's the only character that is able to equip 2 action skills at once, as long as he sacrifices his ability to have grenades. So keep in mind, as we're talking about Zane, you will be able to mix and match any of these 2 action skills together should you choose to get rid of your grenade slot. So that gives Zane a lot of different playstyles and abilities that other characters just can't really reach. So the first skill tree for Zane is actually Double Agent. And this class allows Zane to create a digi-clone of himself that'll stand in place and then shoot at enemies as he walks around and does whatever he wants. Also, Zane is able to teleport between him and the digi-clone. That way he's able to get out of tough situations and cause new and powerful power-ups to happen on the Switch. This skill tree is all about Zane summoning his digi-clone as much as possible and enhancing this digi-clone and himself's damage, reload ability, and just overall magazine size. That way both of them can do a ton of damage together. The next skill tree for Zane is also actually a summoning skill tree, and that's Hitman. So in the Hitman skill tree, Zane is able to summon a Sentinel drone, which will fly around the battlefield and shoot down different enemies as Zane fights himself. This skill tree is all about increasing your attack speed, your reload speed, your fire rate, and your walk speed, and really just making a fast-paced environment where you run around the battlefield doing as much as you can while your drone rains down hellfire from above. This skill tree also has a bunch of action skill augments that allow Zane to make his drone have different attack type damages, missile firing, and just a bunch of extra skills. On top of this skill tree is a really fun one to mix with the previous one. That way you can not only send out a drone, but also a digi-clone of yourself and really just take control of the battlefield with multiple summons while you run around as fast as you can, doing as much damage as you can. Last up, we have Zane's Undercover skill tree, which is the tree you're going to want to play if you want to help out the team as Zane. And that's because his action skill on this tree is a barrier that not only blocks incoming shots from enemies, but also enhances fire from your team going through it. This skill tree is all about being a well-rounded Zane as well, with a lot of different upgrades including things to accuracy, weapon damage, shield regen, and just generally making a well-rounded Zane that isn't so focused on moving quickly or doing damage. On top of this, he can upgrade his barrier with augments that allow special things like increased movement speed when walking through. So this is the type of Zane you want to play if you're focused on helping the team out and not just being a lone player. And last up, the character we're going to be looking at finally is Amara. And while she may be the least favorite and least popular among all of the voting that we've seen online so far, I think she might be a really awesome contender once people actually get their hands on the game, as Amara's all about getting up in people's faces, doing melee damage, and just having crazy abilities to throw at enemies as she's going. I think she's going to be really fun to play, so let's look at all of her different skill trees. Amara's first skill tree, Mystical Assault, allows her to send an astral projection forth to deal damage to everything in her way. And not only does this look cool, but it really fits the build of this skill build, because this build also focuses on rush stacks, which are basically gained by killing enemies, using melee attacks, and shooting things. And what these rush stacks do is give Amara increased reload speed, attack damage, or just healing for allies. Overall, this class is really good if you just want to have a high tempo and get in the enemy's face and just duel and gain rush stacks and let that kind of filter out to your team. Next up, we have Amara's Fist of the Elements skill tree, which is probably the least melee focused of all of her skill trees and allows her to summon a giant fist from the ground that grabs and holds enemies in place, which will allow Amara and her team to easily shoot down enemies while they are basically rendered helpless. This tree also has a heavy focus on elemental damage with high magazine sizes that basically allow Amara to pump a ton of lead into enemies that does crazy, you know, different elemental damage that can really pack a punch on certain types of enemies. And last up, we have a skill tree for Amara called Brawl, which I think is going to specifically tailor itself to players that really want to get in the thick of things and just throw a ton of melee attacks. The action skill on this branch allows Amara to leap into the air and come down to slam the ground, dealing damage to all enemies around and knocking them in the air. On top of this, in this branch, you're going to want to stay up and close on the enemy, doing as many melee attacks as you can, while also, whenever you are shooting, being as close to the enemy as you can to do increased damage and increase your magazine sizes and just critical hits. This is the class you want to play if you don't care about sitting back and shooting, you don't care about finding loot, you just want to get in the enemy's face and just start throwing some punches. But yeah, guys, that's my list. I hope you enjoyed kind of going over all the new characters in Borderlands and all the skills they have. For me personally, I'll probably be playing either Flak or Zane. Probably most likely Zane, since Flak is going to be so popular. But yeah, guys, let me know down below if you guys liked like what I had to talk about today, who you're going to be playing in Borderlands, and if you guys want to play with me, I'll be streaming Borderlands live on twitch.tv/FranklyGaming. So when the game comes out, definitely be there, and hopefully we can build a strong community behind a game that I'm very passionate about. But thank you guys, I really appreciate you coming by today, and I will see you guys next Sunday.